Skaven, right. Yes. First of all, let's start by touching this cover. Loathsome Ratmen and Their Vile Kin, which is the Black Library special book they did, which was kind of like, it's funny, it's kind of like the pinnacle of rattiness, in my opinion. Anyway, what I've done today is I've brought in the notorious army from out of White Dwarf here. Where is it?
Page 17.
17, here it is. The infamous Skaven army. Which, this would be back in 1990. This was actually in White Dwarf. And it made a surprisingly big splash overall. To this day, 40 years odd later, more, 45. No, I'm making that up, aren't I? 35. 35 years later, people still contact me and go, oh yeah, your Skaven army was just like a major thing for me. So I brought them in, my little guys. Now, this may be a very sad occurrence because these guys have been living in cases and have literally travelled 10,000 odd miles over the last 20 odd years because they've gone to America and come back, and so they've gone transatlantic twice, plus moving around in America, which is why they've got all this tape on them.
Do you want some help?
No. You'll be fine. Now, and the reason we put tape on these boxes is because they're old GW boxes, and the locks on them tends to break on their own. So you get this thing where you pull it open, stuff goes everywhere. So there's a tip for you. If you're using these old cases, tape them up when travelling. All right. So what have we got? Put them upside down for one thing. Okay. Ta-da. Can you see that?
Yeah, I'll bring it up.
Cool. Plague Monk Banner Bearer, in fact. And there's a more regular one.
Apologise, I'm trying to focus this with one hand.
Well, we're not exactly doing miniatures photography here, are we? You're just going to take my word.
I'll add photos, obviously. I'll take a bunch of photos of everything and I'll add screen grabs onto the video.
Oh my lord. Right, and there's another good example. Now, the reason I pulled out those ones in particular is because they'd actually date back from before.
I recognise this one here.
Yeah, indeed.
Let me just focus on it. There we are. Lovely.
So these were actually collected and painted before I even worked at Games Workshop. Because you've done your research. The Skaven first appeared in print in 1985 or 86, I think it was, in the Citadel Journal, when they had an article out Skaven to go with Jez Goodwin's new range that he'd just done of Skaven. And it sort of detailed where they came from and some of their weaponry and their social structure and things like this, what they were like. Scavengers, basically. Vile rat men that lived in the sewers, lived in ruins, bred uncontrollably, and were a plague upon mankind. At the time, me and my mates, about half a dozen of us, we used to play D&D for like a long stretches, like a long weekend or a short week, and we'd house share and hang out together and basically run a campaign from starting level going on up. And me and my mate Jamie had decided that we were going to run a campaign with me as kind of like the demon boss and him as the overall referee. So I'd run the monsters and he ran the dungeon. And we worked together, and Jamie painted up a number of these Skaven, and so did I. And that's why they've got these nice kind of like very pastel colours on them and so forth, is because they were actually just painted up to be D&D monsters. And we came up with some reason why they were rat men or what have you, and actually painted up some dungeon tiles as well, cardboard dungeon tiles, so it looked really, really cool. Moved forward a few years, and I started working at Games Workshop in 1990, and Jez was there as well, and I kind of knew him from Asgard War Games Club already. And I really liked the Skaven. ever since we collected these few together for this dungeon. So I took the opportunity while I was there to scrape up a load of metal Skaven and plastic Skaven, anything I could find, basically, to put together an army, because we were going to do a Mighty Empires campaign. So it was like, all right, time to pick your army. So it started to grow and grow. Made a banner bearer for them as well. And because I was trying to put together like large chunks of Skaven, I took advantage of the fact there was a plastic one that was made as part of a set. So there was like an orc, a dwarf, an elf, a Skaven. Just little simple 2-part models. So there's a ton of those in here as well. And there's a ton of these guys as well.
Cheers.
They were done for Hero Quest. Again, very simple, kind of 1-part model, 2-part models, all of these. Early days of Games Workshop experimenting with making plastics, making plastic fantasy miniatures. So quite historical in their own way. So I put together a fairly chunky army out of like a mix of different figures and tried to make it an advantage that we didn't have the same models to go together. So I painted them thematically, which is what you can see in that White Dwarf article of the army. They're very kind of like greens, greys and browns and muted colours for the most part. Went for basing them in a way that wasn't the classic kind of like billiard table of the period with, you know, little rocks made out of milliput, and it's actually railway ballast for the kind of leaf litter effect on them as well. But collectively, they kind of work thematically. And that really made an impact. I never really thought about it before. I'd collected like an orc and goblin army in the past, back in Asgard days. Just this marvellous selection of orcs. Really, really great. Kind of like, he kind of cut his teeth there at Asgard learning how to make a range of miniatures. So there were big orcs, there were little orcs, there were, you know, uruks and snaggers and all this sort of thing, guys with bows and all this sort of stuff. And he'd carried that across into doing the Skaven for Citadel. So they had so much character to them as well. Yet they were all very much tied together. And one of the problems I bounced into quite early on is these plastic ones don't quite mix. They don't quite match the ones that Jez did. I mean, for one, they were plastic models at a time when you had to keep them quite simple, whereas the metal models could get away with a lot more. But the painting of them was the thing that kind of dragged it all together successfully, so they look cohesive as an army. And I think that's one of the things that spoke to people most about that at the time, because the colour schemes were tending towards a little bit on the garish side at the time, in an effort to try and make them easier to photograph and stuff. Plus, when Brian Ansell sold the company, he actually took most of the painted miniatures with him, so to a large extent the heavy metal team was having to start from scratch, and they went for a very bold colour scheme. So it was a big contrast to that at the time, and made a lasting impression. So, because of that, when it came time to do the Skaven Army book for Warhammer, 4th edition I think this is.
Yeah, that's 4th.
That's 4th. Always get confused about Warhammer editions, if I'm honest. I was like Mr. Skaven at that point, clearly, because I had an army and everything. Plus, I had a few bones to pick with the old Warhammer Armies Skaven list, which loved to do things like, oh, you have to collect like 40 Skaven slaves as part of the army before you can even get anything else. And it was like, really? And having painted up, this is the army that taught me, do not paint up units of 40 models at a time, because it's just endless. I mean, when you're doing quite simple paint schemes, it's just like, oh my god, there's so many of them. And I'll turn this around at this point, because you can see that's my clan wrap box, mostly.
I'll take some photos of everything, so...
Yes.
This is a wide angle lens. So
Yeah, oh my god. Anyway, you can see there's a lot of Skaven in there. And like I was saying, big mix of them. Oh, there's also one of my later projects there. Yeah, can I find any of the crew? I actually did some crew for it as well. There must be another box. Yeah, that was an artifact of me getting so sick of being shot at by cannons that I decided I wanted one of my own. So I had a captured one. Again, I don't think I ever actually used it. Oh, there we go. Cannoneer. Oh yeah, that was the other thing about the Skaven army, is that I took great use out of the Blood Bowl team that Jez had done as well. And a lot of them kind of migrated across here. That's actually a Blood Bowl catcher or something, I think. What else have we got in here? Oh yeah. Two-dimensional bat ogres. Oh, there's another cannon crewman. Yeah, very early rat ogres. They've evolved a bit these days. They feel more roided up. These are a classic example how early metal models, because they were pressed in a mould, side to side like this, in a one-piece casting, going outside of the line of draw, as it's called, basically where the mould meets up, was bad. It meant the mould would run out faster, or the miniature wouldn't cast, or what have you. So if you look at all of these and get them down the right dimension, you can see where the line of draw is, because Jez was good about that too. Because it meant you could produce his miniatures. He wanted that.
That's what you want, isn't it?
You do. With minimal trouble.
So is this the first time you've seen this army in?
Ooh, probably about 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, blimey.
Yeah, because I had a chap over to photograph them a little while back. But yeah, I've got trunks of armies in boxes,
Yeah,
as you might imagine. I
yeah.
can never part with them. People have made some very kind offers over the years, but I don't know, man. They're my babies,
Yeah,
you know.
there's some things you just have to hold on to, isn't there?
Yeah, and the Skaven army is one of those, I suspect. Yeah, it's all just more of the same, really. In here we have a large proportion of plague monks in here. Oh, that was one thing I should mention, is when they went in White Dwarf, they did tart them up. These banners are actually done by heavy metal. My rather crude efforts got tossed, and they replaced the banners on them. Because again, when you're photographing, it's one of those things that stands out well. Oh dear, he's come off his base. Yeah, he's always a bit of a victim, this is. Oh yeah, he's fine. Just needs sticking back in, and as you can see, he's lost his banner, unfortunately. And that's the infamous, bumping my microphone, Skaven General on a rat ogre that he converted. So that's a Blood Bowl blitzer, I think, at the top. On top of it was originally a mutant troll, but Jez was very kind and gave me a crash course in how to make fur texture and chainmail texture.
There's worse people you could learn from, isn't there?
Absolutely, absolutely. So unsurprisingly, he was good. He gave me very good tips. I've always been a little bit unhappy with the face I did on it because it looks too much like Mickey Mouse. But again, that's caused a lot of stir over the years, and it's a simple conversion, guys. You can all do this. So, there we are, and not officially part of the Skaven army, but and yeah, and I'm sorry if I sound like I'm downplaying kind of skill involvement in that. That was made by my friend Jamie, the guy who painted up the rest of these Skaven at the time, because he needed a giant spider, so he made one out of milliput and wire. Yes.
I'm taking photos of everything as I'm filming, guys, so just bear with me.
What else have we got in here? Oh, he's lost his tail. They both have. Lots of things that were experiments that never actually made it into the official Skaven army, like the captured cannon. Also wolf rats, which were converted by the cunning of taking a wolf and sticking a rat head on it. Oh, that's the other thing I didn't bring. I have actually got a box full of rats as well, like giant rats, for the rat swarms. Plague sensor bearers on little round bases, because they're all spinny and nutty. Remarkably like Goblin Fanatics, in fact. Well, they're games-wise, they are exactly the same as Goblin Fanatics, in effect. So
when it came to writing the rule book then for 4th edition, you mentioned you had a bone to pick with.
Yeah, that kind of thing. The fact that you didn't have a lot of flexibility in the army you put together, or at least you had to start by having. It was kind of like almost very historical. Yeah. If I was doing Persians, then I must do this.
Yeah, sure.
View of army. So all the Warhammer armies had to a certain extent, but it was particularly egregious with Skaven. And I mean, there were Skaven slave models, but it's one of these things you run into when you create armies of like, having chaff units like that is all well and good, but ultimately somebody has to buy them, paint them, and then field them. And in terms of like, points cost effectiveness on the tabletop, there's not a lot of difference between putting together a Skaven slave unit and putting together a clan rat unit.
Yeah.
So you're forcing them to take trash, which I didn't like. So we kind of I kept Skaven slaves in, obviously, because people might have them, and it was a cool concept, and they have their uses, frankly. Having something you can just throw in the way of people. But you can't make it compulsory. What you can try and do is make them useful enough that it is useful to have them.
Sure.
And I think, even without thinking about it, when I sat down and tried to put together the Warhammer Armies book and put together an army list, because this is the first time I was actually writing an army list effectively from scratch. Yeah. Prior to this, I'd worked on things like Battle Magic.
Yeah.
So, no, to be fair, and I did the High Elf army book as well prior to this.
Sure.
I did the army list for that, but that was very straight and by the numbers. I mean, speaking historical armies like Spearmen, Bowmen, but again, no compulsory choices. I might be lying, and maybe there were compulsory choices in the High Elves, I don't remember. But we tried not to do that kind of thing. We tried to make individual units appealing on their own basis. So this was an opportunity because Skaven are kind of crazy. They've got fire throwers, they've got poison wind globes and all this sort of stuff. Plague sensor bearers that whip around more like Goblin Fanatics and so on. So there were these various elements to it. It came across a lot like a Goblin army, because that's sort of kind of what it was. And I wanted to try and push up the differences more and make it play distinctly as being a Skaven army. So one of the things I did was I introduced a modifier to encourage, and this was an aesthetic thing as much as anything else, deep units. Normally you kind of, in Warhammer at the time, you get a bonus for having a back rank, but you didn't really get anything for being deeper than that. So everybody just ran around in 2-rank deep units. And I thought that looked rubbish, especially for these guys, and particularly because they aren't individually very good. You don't necessarily want to be on a big frontage against another unit. So I decided to try and make them work more like in a column formation, so give them additional bonuses for having more back ranks, up to +4. So they could be up to 4 ranks deep and get a bonus out of it. To encourage that kind of look on the battlefield. And also to, obviously you want to have quite big units if you're going to do that, so you get bigger units and so forth. Which was cool and fine and dandy and lots of fun, until it ran into Warhammer's great love of having war machines in it, which, put pie plates down and kill everything underneath and stuff like that, which is why you might have noticed I've got a bit of a thing about war machines and things like cannon, because I spent a lot of time being shot at by things like them. But that's okay. When you design an army list, you get to control everything. So not only were the Skaven, one of their advantages is that they're actually a little bit quicker than most things. They've got a speed of 5 instead of 4. So they could march quickly. And when it came to doing spells, I put in spells which would help them move faster on the battlefield, things like Death Frenzy, summon up rats, and effectively teleport things straight into combat if you can get the points for it and so forth. Because I knew you kind of needed to short circuit I've got a big army, it's getting to be a smaller army. By the time it hits you, it just kind of bounces off. any Warhammer army worth their salt that was depending on a gun line like that would have a hard unit or two and some characters to kind of deal with stuff that got through.
Yeah.
So you need to be able to get there with enough to be able to overwhelm and attack the dwarf crossbowmen with two-handed weapons and all the rest of it that you're always running up against. So it was a very kind of honed army, and it played quite well because of that, because it had a purpose and it had a way of functioning. Because at the end of the day, all of these units were basically just a big mask to get your fire throwers and your poison wind globes in position, which were your war engines that would then kill the enemy. Came down to it like that. So yeah, that was yeah, me writing an army list so I could win battles, basically. Which is not why you should write army lists, boys and girls.
Just because I don't know, but things like the fire throwers, were they in the Warhammer armies list from 3rd edition? Or were those?
Yes, yeah, they were in from the start. They were in from the Citadel Journal. That had little fire thrower teams in it. And poison wind globes. Most of the kind of key features of it were things that Jez had envisaged at the outset. And they were part of his write-up for it and so forth. And he'd made miniatures for them and stuff as well. Sure. And assassins as well. That was the other thing they have. Clan Eshin assassins. Which, again, they hide in units like the Fanatics, like the Sensibirs, and then jump out when you get close enough. So another thing I did was push, because Jez had done a whole range, so he'd done Clan Eshin slingers and stuff like that as well. So I pushed up to having units of those, which again, they were in the Warhammer Armies book, but they were a bit of an afterthought. Once again, something with a little bit of reach, at least, so you can have some fun on the way in. And of course, that line of thinking, I don't actually have the unit anymore because I gave it to Alessio, is what eventually leads you to Jezzail's.
Alessio wrote that book, didn't he?
Yes, yeah, he took over doing Skaven. I was doing Warhammer 40,000, obviously, in my later career. Yeah. So I gave him some bits of my Skaven army, like the Jezzail's. That's actually a leader. I think he's the Jezzail leader, because the actual Jezzail's a guy holding a rest, which I very helpfully did it with pavis, like shields on their backs for my own ones, for my own amusement. And yeah, pushing in Jezzail's. And again, it's not in here. I may have given that to Alessio as well. But the first ever rattling gun was a conversion that I did just on a fire thrower team with a Titan weapon, going like, well, what if we did like a rattling gun and so forth. So yeah, it started a route of development, which I'm just tickled pink that Skaven is still around, and they're actually one of the stronger suits out of the certainly the old world style armies.
I think they're very unique in it, but
they're very precocious indeed, very unique. They're very unique to Games Workshop, and that's why you keep seeing them pop up in the video games, Vermintide, and Total War. Are absolutely, I won't say completely dominated, but there's a lot of Skaven stuff in there. And in terms of getting new plastics and new armies coming out, Skaven always seem to be quite high up on the menu.
I think Age of Sigmar, they had not too long ago. They had some kind of re-release. I don't know.
Yeah, you don't keep up with that stuff. I don't either these days, but I certainly seem to see, there was certainly a period of seeing a lot of plastic Skaven around the place that were really nice. I was like, half tempted, but no. I have my dodgy old army to play around with anyway, if it ever comes down to it. So, also not featured here that I didn't bring with me was the first I put together. The Screaming Bell was something that was talked about in the old lore, going right back to the journal, and we wrote that up as a piece and actually made one later on. I never liked the model very much, but I'd scratch built one myself, just with a cart and some sort of wedding cake decoration, I think, for the bell itself and so forth a long time before. So, yeah, Screaming Bells too. So, yeah, a lot of little building and conversion work over the years. And there's a lot of love in each of these figures looking at them now. My God, to be able to paint that fast.
Did you get many games in with this particular army?
Back in the day, they were a regular. Yeah, very much a regular, and played a lot of different games. Around the studio, mostly with other people there. which had a big preponderance of, this is why I've got an obsession with dwarf armies, because there were a lot of them around the studio. There were at least 3 or 4 of them. But they all kind of look the same, frankly, when you're on the receiving end. So yeah, they got trotted out a lot, first of all for that Mighty Empires campaign, and then subsequently down the years, whenever we were playing Warhammer, which was quite a lot as they were working on 4th edition and stuff like that. Yeah. They get trotted out as an adversary army and to try things out. One incident that's always stayed with me was we were testing out, Jervis was testing his undead rules out, or his undead army for Warhammer armies. And undead dragon kind of landed in front of the Skaven army, and it was like good old-fashioned Warhammer morale rules where the closest unit, which was of course the boss unit with the boss in it and everything, like rolled an 11. That was the other thing about having deep ranks. It added onto your morale test as well. Didn't matter here. Rolled an 11. Ran away. Yeah. Caused a panic effect on the nearby guys. Ran away too. And basically my army ran away on turn 1. There were a couple of units like far out of the periphery that held their ground type thing, but it was gone. Yeah. And it was like, oh, all just from this undead dragon womp landing in front of them. So it was like, all right, victory to you, Joe. Let's go again, shall we? Oh, God. That was the shortest game of Warhammer I ever had. Much longer setting it up than actually playing it. So yeah, they did the rounds. But yeah, they've not actually been used in anger for decades at this point, I must confess. Because, like I say, I got onto working on Warhammer 40,000 pretty exclusively through the mid to late 90s. So they got sealed in their boxes, and I've carried them around continent to continent ever since to show off to people as much as anything else and talk about.
We'll get a game in sometime. I've got my Chaos Dwarfs.
There's little runes on the front of that shield. My God. Me hand painting back in 1990. Yeah, honestly, these days I'm always interested in trying things that are new.
Sure.
You know. Yeah, Warhammer armies. Yeah, Chaos Dwarves, Skaven. I must have confessed, I've never actually played against Chaos Dwarves, but they always just seem like Dwarf Plus as far as I could tell.
4th edition. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, as far as I'm aware, they're just dwarfs with
blunderbusses.
Yeah, magic and cavalry, you know. So
yeah. Taking away everything that makes them dwarfy. So, yeah, I haven't played them in Total War either, for that matter.
They're powerful.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. Everything's powerful in Total War, though. This is the thing. You get stomp around on everybody. And I have to confess, in terms of scratching my Warhammer itch, a great advert here for Creative Assembly, Total War fulfills all my needs.
As a bit of comparison, how do you feel this like your army compares to the PC game interpretation of Skaven? Well,
Skaven went through, I mean, obviously, Alessio picked up the torch, picked up the ratty torch here, and then subsequently they went through a lot of iteration as well. A lot of new units came in. I mean, we added the Doom Wheel in here, just because having a rat wheel, hamster wheel thing was just too funny not to. And they've gone on from there, and they've added various other units, rattling guns or an entire unit type now in their own right. I've used them in Total War, horrendous. Face them as well, they're horrendous. So there's been a lot of iteration since then. It is all, one of the things I like about it is all very faithful to the cause, though.
It is, yeah.
I mean, in those early days, I worked very closely with Bill King as well when I was doing the 4th edition.
I mentioned him and Skaven Slayer, if you've ever read the novel.
Yes, I have. Well, he was writing those at the same time, shortly after. It was not long after that he was doing things like Skaven Slayer. So we talked about Skaven a lot, and because again it was my first army book that I was writing myself, because he'd done all of the background lore and stuff like that, and all the colour text for the High Elves book. So I leaned on him quite hard for advice, and he actually wrote some of the colour text in Warhammer Armies 4th edition as well.
Trying to convince him to do a video with me, because I know he's trying to convince him to do a video call with me. So
okay, I'll speak to him. I am actually working with him again at the moment on Conflict 47, which has been delightful.
Awesome. Yeah,
absolutely delightful.
We've spoken online a number
It would be terrific if you could get to talk to him because
Yeah.
he's such a funny character to
Yeah.
talk to overall. And that kind of, that underlying sense of humour, which comes a lot in Skaven Slayer as well, was something we always wanted to keep in there, that the Ratman, while, you know, horrific and, you know, evil genius and so forth, were so comically at times fallible too, that they could basically create these massive schemes and then fall to infighting in the midst of them and stuff like that. And that is something that's been kept very much in their character all the way through as well. And yeah, they have a really tremendously defined character, I think, in the fantasy genre, which has elevated them up to become a pucker, you know, fantasy race alongside the more usual fare of elves, dwarves, and men, which is quite an achievement, really. I said at the outset I collected an orc and goblins sort of like army back in the day, but that was based around that miniatures, the Asgard miniatures range that Jez had done of orcs. And back then, that was very much a sort of like Tolkien-esque kind of conception of like Uruks and Snagger and so forth. So Workshop's kind of created its own genre of orcs and goblins out of that, which is kind of taken over to a large extent. When you look in other sources now, they tend to be big and green and fangy. So yeah, which makes them a bit more distinct, I guess. But Skaven are great. They're very much their own thing, and continue to be so. So that's been nice to see. It's always very heartening when things work out like that. So yeah, that's me and Skaven, I think. It was a fairly brief, if in the cosmic scheme of things, intercession between the two of me in Games Workshop terms, because by the time second edition 40k rolled around, I just got pulled on to just doing that.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was only about 3 or 4 years that these guys, I say, they saw a lot of track time during then as well.
Was there any? I'm sure there's things online about Skaven in 40k. Was that ever any kind of concept?
It was something we batted around and we talked about a lot. Me and Jez talked about it a lot. You know, he'd done some concepts for it and things like that, which kind of emerged as the HRUD eventually. But part of their appeal is that they've got that sort of like slightly anachronistic technology inserted into a fantasy world. And once you put them in 40k, they don't have that anymore. And beyond that, what are they really? And it's like, they never really had enough going for them to sort of like make that transition across. Yeah, sure, you could do them, but you could do lots of things. You know, in the end, we decided it would be more interesting to do something different. Because they were in contention at the time when we were looking at doing 2 new races at the end of 3rd edition.
That was Tau and
Necrons.
of course,
And, you know, we actually had a little contest of different potential races to do, and those are the ones that won out. And the HRUD were in there as well. But honestly, they weren't one of the strongest contenders because they didn't really have a lot to bring to the table.
They say they fill that niche in fantasy, but it doesn't really.
They fill it beautifully in fantasy, and I mean, one of the things I should give credit to and why they're so popular as well is that they featured really heavily in the Warhammer Fantasy roleplay too, because they make great antagonists for that. You know, because they can literally live there right in the city and in the sewers and stuff. Yeah, they were marvellous for that. So a lot of early White Dwarfs had fantasy roleplay articles in them too. So they have this sort of like broad grounding of being a useful addition in a fantasy universe that wasn't really there so much. And it was a contested space anyway. If you're looking at scavenging and things, well, that's kind of the orc way, orcs with a K, consummate scavengers themselves. So they were kind of never really settled in properly to do anything with them on that front. And they were doing a great job in Skaven. So it's a weird one, isn't it? There's so many things that get brought across from Warhammer straight into 40k, and you know, in some ways make their exception there more than in Warhammer. Skaven actually go the other way. Something they are entirely of Warhammer, and they're kind of best off staying there, in my opinion, my creative opinion anyway. I'll get proven wrong next week, I'm sure. Vermintide in space. And that was it. I was talking to Bill King last week, actually, because we were working together on Conflict 47. But we were having a laugh about Skaven, about Vermintide specifically, because I'd invented it as a spell name, and he just made a joke that it sounded like a festive season for Skaven, and I believe he wrote it into the books as such as well in the end, which shows you how circular these things can be.
For sure.
So, yeah.